All right, you're on tape. This is probably the last session in this semester, and then we'll have to wait till next semester in fall. Unless you want me to wrap up Hebrews right now. No.
Oh, I don't.
I find it really interesting because I get to dig deep into it, and I hope you guys are getting enough depth into it that it makes it very exciting and interesting in spite of the time that it takes to do this. But I don't know, this may be a once-in-a-lifetime experience for each of us to be able to study the Word of God, okay, that's theological, or, you know, to study these ancient documents in this kind of depth, because you usually don't get this opportunity, even in college, to do it quite like we're doing. So anyway, I have the word of the day. Let's see, this word, diatheminos. We had diatheke. You remember we had the word diatheke, and diatheke is a disposition. Diatheminos is not exactly a disposition. It's a similar word from a similar source, but it's not the same. And this is where things get a little complicated, especially in the context of okay, you thought it was hard before. These few verses in here are very complex verses, and they're not translated exactly very easily, and they're hard to translate. I was spending large amounts of time just trying to contemplate exactly how to tell you what it says within context. Hopefully the best thing to do is tell you what the words say, and maybe you'll come to even a better understanding than I do, or help me with my understanding, because this is a little difficult to fully comprehend. We know that a disposition, I talked about this at large in another class, about a disposition versus a deposition, right? A disposition is what this diatheke means. So a judge, it means that a judge has adjudicated already. We translate it as a covenant, we translate it as a will. It is not a covenant, it is not a will. That is not what it is. Because a will and a covenant are future things, where a disposition has occurred and a judge has ruled on a disposition. For example, a will is just a will. But until the will goes through probate, right, and a judge has ruled on it, then it becomes a disposition, right? Because then the will has been finished. So to translate this word as will or even as covenant is not exactly correct, although we find diatheke specifically translated as covenant, many times as will, especially in Hebrews as will. So we will notice this, but we just need to recognize this. The problem with this word, diatheminos comes from the same two words as diatheke. Dia, meaning a channel or act, and then themine. Themine means to place, to place. But diatheminos means literally to put apart, or to dispose. So where diatheke is a disposition, diatheminos is to dispose. Okay, in other words, if I have a disposition, it means a judge has said in court that this is the way things should happen, right? But a diatheminos means it is now disposed. So the arbitrator of the will, the person who takes care of the will, who's that?
Executor.
The executor. This means the executor, you know, has now given you the car keys and given you the bank accounts, and it is taken care of. It's all done. The problem with this is that diatheminos is translated as appoint, make, or testator. Does anybody see a problem with this? It's what the executor does or has done, but it's not the executor. It's not the testator. To appoint or make, that's getting closer, right? To appoint, especially, it means I've given you it. I've appointed you, right? I've completed it, but it still doesn't fully comprehend. You know, we think in English, and we do, we have over 1 million words in English, and there's probably a word in English, although no one knows it, right? You have to go, if you could find it, you'll be lucky. But there's probably a word in 1 million words in English that means specifically what we're talking about. Maybe dispose is appropriate. But what I'm trying to tell you is this gets really complicated, and the way the verbiage and words are used in Hebrews makes it even more complicated. So as we look through it, let's just keep that in mind. So I gave you a simple one, or a simpler one, that we have to look at this, but this is a word we love. We know this word, E-N-T-O-L-E-S, entolos. Entolos. Entolos means in. In is literally close enough to in to say in. And then tolos is telos. And a telos is we know it's not really a conclusion, but we know it is the vanishing point. You know, I hate to always bring this up because this is the easiest way to understand it, but it's a vanishing point, and it also means, remember, Greeks are not figurative. They don't like to be figurative, but they have a very concrete language where they throw great words in that have incredibly concrete meanings that also fits figuratively or euphemistically within the context, especially of what we talk about, for example. So, an telos is a completed telos. In other words, it's usually translated command or injunction, command or precept. The best translation is an injunction, an authoritative prescription. So even then, do you guys notice the Greeks being very concrete are still a little slippery? The Greek is a little slippery. Maybe that will help you understand both their culture and the way they think. Because we do the same thing, except we do it with words much more than they do.
When the Greeks use these words, were they legal words for them as well?
They are, I think it would be best to say it's their mindset, and you're hitting on a really fantastic thought, okay? We would say, hearing a Greek conversation, or if we were ancient Greek speakers or thinkers, right? We would not notice any different, but yet if we were able to see it within the context of our thinking, we would say, you're very sparse, you're very direct and specific. And when you use terms, you're using them very precisely. And at the same time, I think we would say they're a little slippery. Because remember, this is a society that will not say, I am. Right? I don't know how, I'm not sure how, we're talking about cigar night. We're talking about how Japanese culture is so different than Western cultures, because I had an experience of some Japanese cultural things that I did not understand that became very clear to me. That the Japanese, for example, won't tell you, would never tell you, you have lint on your shoulder, or you have dirt on your clothing, or even if you drop your glasses behind you, they would probably pick up your glasses but not give them back to you, because it would be embarrassing for you because you lost your glasses, and at the same time it would be embarrassing to them to have to approach someone who's a stranger. It's the culture. How much of the Greek culture is like that? I am not certain. But I know that that all cultures have issues. Many times we don't fully comprehend the issues of our own culture because they're too close to us. We have blinders on, cultural blinders. So in trying to comprehend the Greek, recognize that they are very concrete, they are very specific, so specific as to telling you what kind of love or how they're saying things, right? When I would just say, well, I told you, I said to you, right? And they would say, you know, the same conversation would be, well, I was giving my opinion at cigar night, or I was giving a logical argument at cigar night, or I was doing this, right? So in Greek speak, I'd be very, very specific, and I'd be using words that we would say they would use in their legal system for a couple of reasons. Number one, they have a very sparse vocabulary. They only have about 20,000, 25,000 words or so, approximately 20,000 words in ancient Greek. So with a 20,000 word count, it's very sparse. But that means words, when they have a word for something, it's very important, right? Where what we do is, what do we do? If you go into a court of law, are they using language you're not used to? Yeah. We got a whole vocabulary for legalese, right? And if you read the miniature text at the bottom of something, if you can understand it, you'll probably say, well, where did that come from, right? Very interesting. So, you know, even the church, well, we of the church have developed our own vocabulary. Many times others can't fully comprehend or understand what we're talking about. Yes, sir.
Kind of an extension of his question. I mean, if we don't understand what logos to telos is by now, we probably aren't going to get it. But,
Right.
but my question is a logos in the Greek mind have to be true? When someone is speaking, it's a logical argument. I mean, if they can support what telos they're trying to get to, even if it's totally BS, does it still fit in the logos to telos definition?
That is a beautiful question. And I was contemplating something similar today because, you know, the Bible says, in one of the famous quotes from the Catholics, they say that every man, it's from the Psalms, I believe, every man believes that he is right in his own eyes, or something close to that. I'm paraphrasing, but you know, every human believes he is right in his own eyes. The Greeks would say that what you do is you bring your logos to others, right, in a symposium. And in that symposium, the others pick apart your logos. So if you remember the Socratic dialogues, that's exactly what Socrates did. Whether it may not have been some of them were symposiums, some were not. But he would, for example, someone would bring up a question, and then Socrates would put out a logos in questions to the hearers, right? And the point was that when they got to the end, whose conclusion was it?
Groups?
The groups, yeah. It wasn't his conclusion. Because remember, a logos is simply a statement of, it can be questions, it can be statements of fact of some type. But who makes the telos?
Well, I would have said the person delivering it, but you're saying that it's the group, it's the audience.
Well, obviously, from a Greek standpoint, the person who's making the argument has already contemplated the vanishing point, right? Has already contemplated what the conclusion should be. But the point is to make...
But does it have to be true?
Okay, a Greek would say, if it is a truly comprehensive logos, then everyone here should come to the same conclusion. Now, we know that's not necessarily true, but how did the Greeks solve that issue? They solved it a couple of ways.
They killed the people that disagreed.
Well, in a way they did. They basically, if you were not, well, if you did not speak Greek, you were a A barbarian, yeah, barbaros. You're a savage. You're a barbarian. They call it barbaros, a barbarian. That's where the word barbarian comes from. But it's like the Aesop's fables, right? You're supposed to read the Aesop's fables if you were Greek, ancient Greek, and understand them and come to the moral. But the Latins, the Romans, didn't all come to that conclusion. Number one, their understanding of Greek was poor. They weren't culturally Greek, right? So they said, well, let's write down the morals so you can't miss it. And even then they got them wrong. So your point is well taken, and I think it's an important point. But I would point out to you, okay, one of Immanuel Kant's big points, one of the ways he proved God was, even though every single human being thinks differently from every other single human being, we still, and we don't know. I don't have any idea whether your concept of the green that I'm wearing is the same as the concept of the green you're wearing, or green at all. And I have a pair of pants here that I don't know if they appear green to you, but under certain light they turn brown. I have no idea why. And you notice on the internet, people show those pictures that some perceive as one color and others as another color, right? What we're seeing in social media is something that has never happened before in the history of people. Because in the past, you know, if you know, there are scents and tastes that some people can comprehend that you can't, right? There are maybe colors or variants of colors or patterns that others can see that you can't. The variation in human culture is amazing, but yet we know one thing. We can all come to some agreement on some level, right? We do. The problem that people don't realize, though, is how, oh boy, this really gets difficult, how culturally different we are. You know, it is stupid. The most stupid statements that were ever made, especially during the Cold War, they're just like us. No, they aren't just like you. People that are steeped in a different culture, and if you read Ayn Rand and see what the Soviet culture was like, you go, God forbid. Or if you really understood the Chinese culture, Chinese communist culture, you go, God forbid. There are cultures that are heinous, that are not ecumenical to human beings. I thought it was really funny, the pastor in the prayers used over and over again the word, what is it, corrupt systems? I'm like, what does that mean? I mean, you know, a communist would tell you that a corrupt system is capitalism. Right. But I think God would tell you that capitalism is free markets and freedom to people. The Brits would say we want to outlaw guns and knives because we want to protect people from themselves. And yet, those who understand freedom know that the first thing you do to take over a nation as a despot is you take away people's guns and knives so they can't fight back. You know, which is a corrupt system? You know, the Brits just let a little baby die who was fully alive because they have a socialized healthcare system that, well, people die routinely.
They didn't let them, they forced him to die.
They forced him to die. Well, we did Terry Schiavo. Terry Schiavo was killed by us, okay? So our country bears the guilt of Terry Schiavo's death because she was fully competent, you know, full human being that was allowed to die. You figure that one. Or actually, she was killed. She was put to death. Forced to die. So, you know, what's a corrupt system? I think, well, our founding fathers said all governments were corrupt systems. But my point is this. No matter how you think it, everybody's cultures and thoughts are different, but yet there are things that we agree on. And that's the point. That's what Immanuel Kant's whole thing was. That it's astounding that the reality of everyone is different, but yet the reality of everyone to a degree is the same. And that's how his argument of God basically goes. That what is the cohesive principle that brings it all together? Immanuel Kant said it was Theos, God. You know, I don't know. So back to the Logos to Telos. What was the thing that God said? In the beginning was The Logos. And the Logos was with God. I don't know, pretty cool stuff.
Did the Greeks have any absolute truths?
They believe they did.
Undeniable truths?
Hmm.
They-
So is that a cultural aspect?
The undeniable truth?
I mean, you gave a very good logos about how we are different.
Right?
So, the communist regime versus the capitalistic regime, what is certainly a percentage, and probably the ruling percentage, believed that what they were doing was truth.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, it benefited them immensely if they were on top, so to
Bingo,
me,
bingo, bongo.
it's a fallacy in the argument.
Right.
That's neither here nor there. People that want to attack capitalism, also, most of the people that support a capitalistic society are the ones that are successful.
Yes.
The ones that fail say it's a corrupt system.
Right.
So, back to his question, is there any absolute truth other than Kant's argument?
You know what's really funny? I was just thinking about this, so I have in my mind already the answer to your question, and it's astounding I was thinking about this, because I was thinking about this yesterday in context of something very similar. The answer is your willingness to pull it out and look at it. So, if I have a logos, if I have an idea about things or something, the willingness, and this is what the Greek society was based on, their willingness to take out that argument and display it to others and have others shoot it down or agree with it, right? And then everyone would come to their own telos. So, for example, if I'm a good communist and I'm willing to do that and I pull out my logos, right? I suspect that if I were to present Marx's arguments to you, what would be your telos? I mean, I'm a staunch capitalist, but I believe that your telos would be Venezuela, right? Or communist China, or Nazi Germany. Nazi Germany is a leftist National Socialist nation, right? They were basically communists, but they called themselves National Socialists. So, I'm just saying, if I pull out my logos, and I'm a communist, right, and I present it to you, what should be your telos?
The examples of proof.
Well,
You'll have it.
if I tried to prove it to you, my logos would end up with you
Probably trying to kill you.
shooting it down. Yeah. See, that's what the Greeks would say. The problem with most people, the problem with closed societies or closed ideas is their unwillingness to take out that idea and look at it. And I think that's the answer. And I think that's one of the reasons the Greek and Western civilization have been so successful. Because can you pull out, like for example, the idea of Taoism, the idea of karma? Can you really pull that out and evaluate it? Reincarnation. Yes, sir.
It's my understanding that Aristotle was killed or executed for his ideas and thoughts.
Not Aristotle, Socrates.
Socrates?
Yeah.
All right. In the context of what we're talking about, what appears to be an enlightened civilization, why would they do that to him?
That is not really a fair assumption. Socrates died for what he believed in. And if you read my book, The Second Mission, in it I get Crito's argument. But he had ample opportunities to escape. In fact, they wanted him to escape. The state wanted him to leave, to banish himself, to run away in exile away from the state so that they wouldn't kill him. Because he was willing to die. He said, he was willing to die for his logos. Period. Die. Because he believed that the telos was fundamentally obvious. And he believed that the logos for dying for the state, that the state was more important than his life. That's the Crito.
Okay, but in the context that we're talking about, with free ideas and looking at things, why would they be so exercised on his views? Why would they just say, thank you for your comments. You know, let's move on down the line.
We're not convinced.
Well, I'm not saying they were perfect. I'm just saying that this was, if you ask for an exposition of how was it supposed to work, what they thought Socrates, and look, you have to read the second mission if you haven't, because it really incorporates the credo and the apology. And remember, he came this close to being absolved of the charges, but he gave a talk that was a logos that ended with the telos of them putting him to death or voting for his death. He did it on purpose. And you say, was he a martyr? Well, he was a martyr for his belief, but that he couldn't keep his mouth shut. You know, he's like Paul. You know, Paul's thorn in the flesh was he couldn't keep his mouth shut, right? I mean, that's obvious. And, you know, we forever have said, oh, was his eyesight or he had some kind of... No. If you look at Paul just couldn't keep his mouth shut. He kept getting kicked out, right? And everybody had to fix his problems. Kind of like Giuliani, right? Rudy Giuliani, you know? Saying stupid stuff and then like having to backtrack, you know? That's Paul the apostle. And we should learn from Paul. But yet, Paul was able to give some really good logos to telos, right? And I think Paul himself, if you notice, Hebrews, right? The Hebrews have obviously pulled out these logoses, and what do? Polished them. You know, we want to think that these are flippant ideas. These are flip ideas, right? I mean, that's the impression you get.
Well, don't we believe that they were inspired by God? So how much polishing did they need? I know you're going to have to step into theological.
I'm not going to touch theological bull on that one, because see, this comes back to what I say. You know, we are looking at historical documents, right? They're historical documents by people in a historical time. And these Greeks, remember, I would say Hebrews more than any other. Hebrews more than any other of the documents in the New Testament. The documents in the New Testament relate history. But Hebrews, and I would say all of them, the writers, being a writer myself, okay, I know that I take ideas about things I'm going to write down, and I put them through my brain over and over again. Now, I usually don't pull them out in symposia, but guess what? What's different in the ancient world about writing that is different than today?
Most people couldn't read it anyway.
What's that?
It was expensive, you couldn't do a lot of writing.
Speaking.
Well, not only expensive, but the writing of it. You know, because, okay, it's expensive, so I only get one chance, right? Or I get a chance to say it, my argument, and then my the guy, the search with the L. The guy who does it for me, the guy who writes it down my letter. Well, it's described. There's a word in Greek. Anyway, the guy that I hired that writes my letter for me, he's fixing my grammar, helping with my logos, and so that gives me a chance to make sure that it's really good, right? But I guarantee you, especially in Hebrews, these guys, because of the way the Greeks are supposed to work, they were pulling out these ideas with everyone in the symposium. Isn't that what they tell us to do? Right? In Hebrews. What is the message of Hebrews? Talk to your neighbor. Ask other Greek speakers. Air these ideas. Why? Because they believed they were inherently factual and true. And not only that they believed that by hearing them, that you would come to the same conclusion that they did.
But
Right?
so back to Max's question, which I'd like to know the answer to. But still, in general, your ideas had to be within a certain scope of accepted. If they were outside of that, then you were in trouble, or?
Well, the problem with Socrates, and you got to go back and look at Socrates. Socrates asked questions and the way he posed some of his arguments basically eroded the beliefs the Greeks believed that they eroded the beliefs of the Greek system. They eroded their sense of religion, and they eroded their sense of propriety and education and their overall system. That's why when I wrote
So
this,
they
have
believed
truths.
they believed he was heretical.
they did. That's why they put him on trial, was for heresy. He tried, I think he argued correctly. His logos was correct, but the telos, the problem with the telos, and this comes back to what you said, or what you were stating before, okay? If it's obvious that low taxes are really good for average people, then why would anyone vote for high taxes for the government? And yet you have politicians who routinely vote for high taxes. I would argue that that is an obvious telos that it's harmful to the people. Higher the taxes, the worse it is. Social Security is the biggest Ponzi scheme that anyone can imagine, but there are people who actually believe that it's good. But why would they do that? Because of self-interest. What'd you say? They make money from it. Yeah. You know, their self-interest, you know, whatever. I don't know what their motivations are, but they're not motivated to goodness. So maybe that's incorrect.
I mean,
corrupt institutions.
we're ways, but
Weird.
you brought up something that
Oh.
you brought up Social Security, which is now labeled an entitlement program.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason it's an entitlement program is because it is a Ponzi scheme today, because the money was all spent.
Right, exactly.
But, I mean, initially it was not a Ponzi scheme.
No, initially it was a Ponzi scheme
Yeah,
because
it
they
still
started.
relies on the younger workers.
Yeah,
usually.
because it started paying out the people who didn't put into it. But the big point is this: if you had if you had been able to put your money into the stock market that was put in Social Security, you'd be a millionaire today.
Sure.
I assure you. But yet the government has stolen your money, and so you're going to get a pittance. But you know, I'm not meaning to bring up a logos that may or may not have a telos that you all agree with. I'm just trying to give examples of how I think, you know, people who supposedly say they're doing benefits for you and me, but yet they give us Social Security, which takes 15% of the income of the average worker. That's more than God wants. How could that be? Yes.
I was just gonna say, you can tell a lot about their motives by what they're willing or not willing to argue about.
Yeah, like for example, how many federal employees or how many federal politicians have Social Security? Zero. They have their own system that pays them big bucks. Boy, they're making millions. But why don't we get that? Well, you couldn't afford it, right?
Well, we can't afford Social Security.
We can't afford Social Security either. So, you know, why not have socialized medicine? Well, that means the little children would die. And by the way, they abort children like crazy over there, so they don't have a problem with. But then this is it. I'm just saying. Okay, back to logos and telos. The logos. You know, the Greeks believed that if you took those ideas, and that's the point of taking those ideas out, to polish them. And that's the big difference. And by the way, have you noticed something? What is the biggest problem facing America today is probably the fact that you have children on the campi that are unwilling to take out the ideas and polish them, to figure them out. They won't even face opposition, right? If anyone opposes their ideas, they're going to shoot you. You know, Antifa, you know, hang you, you know. Yeah, it's offensive to me, it's offensive.
So back to the period of time you're right here.
Yes.
Was it still a majority, or did it have to be unanimous? I mean, I can't imagine 10 men or women being in a room at the same time and all 10 of them agreeing.
You have to read Socrates' arguments, and that's one of the arguments I made in my book, that,
Well,
you know.
let's talk specifically about the writers of Hebrews. I
Well-
mean, they put it out there. In their mind, are you saying all the writers, however many there were in total agreement that that's how it should be written?
In the Acts, it tells us that when Paul gave his talk in Athens, 1/3 said, I believe, 1/3 said, I'd like to hear more, and 1/3 said, you know, don't come back. So that's pretty darn good. I would say yes, sir.
I've always thought as the logos to telos process, a contemporary leftover that we still have in our society is court of law, where a prosecutor, you know, going into the case, his telos is the defendant is guilty. So he's gotta present all of his points, his logos, as evidence, here's this fact, here's this fact. And everybody in the jury has to agree those facts are established facts, they're true. And then they come to tell us that, yes, this person is guilty. So that's kind of the way I visualize it, is what they're doing.
Well,
That is beautiful, and thanks for reminding me of that. Did you have something?
Well, I was just gonna say a couple things. Proof text, I mean, you throw out an equation, and then you go about proving it's either true or false, which you tell us. But the same thing, how much emotion were they using back in the day when this was going on? I think that we have, I mean, you've got a survival culture. You don't know where your next meal is. A lot of times, I'm not sure they had it. Now, I know in Athens they had a lot of time to navel gaze and chit chat, but it seemed like so much of where we get in trouble now is our culture is so logical. It's based more on feelings. That feels something, therefore that's correct. And it's whereas here, I don't think that they had. I think that that's part of our problem understanding this, is we're looking at it today and we waste so much time on chasing things that don't make any sense to begin with, and then trying to bat down these arguments that shouldn't even be in place.
I agree, Meg. What you're saying is actually the great fight in the age of reason, between the logisticians, those who believe that logic could prove everything, and the empiricists. And guess who won? You know who won, right? The empiricists won. And because empiricism won, the answer today is always scientific method, where really logic and reasoning and historical method are that's how a court of law. I think our founding fathers and our founding jurisprudence, the whole concept of jurisprudence is that if I can make a logos to a jury, right, and the jury comes up with a unanimous decision, because if it's not unanimous, what happens? It's a hung jury, and they either start over or you're acquitted, right? So the big deal is that I think empirically, and this is what we miss, and I think this is where, and I'm not going to point at you and say this is, but I think all of us are affected by this, that we as a culture have stopped believing in that process, right? Just like that we don't have a democratic process, just like in our republic. When we vote somebody into office, that person was voted by a majority into office, right? Whatever the way we have determined the means of voting. And so you just can't go unless you want to destroy the system and say it doesn't count because we don't like the answer. The same thing's true in a jury trial. If you can get a jury of 12 to agree, right? Even if they were tricked, which, by the way, that happens a lot. The FBI has been shown to present a lot of illegal evidence, which later on they find the defendant's not guilty. Isn't that interesting? Armed secret police forces are not good, just saying. That's why the Constitution doesn't allow them. Oh boy, that's not theology, that's politics. But anyway, so, but I'm saying that a logos to tell us, in my opinion, if I were to give you the logos that says that, for example, why did the founders not allow any armed secret police forces under our Constitution? Only the Army and the Navy are allowed to carry weapons. And you'd say, well, I haven't studied that, but it's in the Federalist Papers, they talk about it, because there were armed secret police all over the place. And today we have 70 armed secret police forces in our government. So, to me, the obvious logos to tell us is whether you agree with it or not. What's the obvious tell us? In a free nation, you shouldn't have armed secret police forces. I mean, that just makes sense, doesn't it? That's what our founders put up. So even if you don't agree with even if you agree that there should be armed secret police forces, what should the telos be in your mind?
That we don't have a free nation.
That you don't have a free nation anymore. Yeah, exactly. I think we have lost the perspective, right? There is truth. There is truth. Even if the Greeks were smart enough to know that you can't prove truth.
But the premise of our culture is that truth is what you make it or what you want it to be personally, then you can't even start.
You can't even start. And if I told you, at the turn of the 20th century, what did they stop teaching kids? Logic and the historical method. And Latin and Greek. But historical method was how you put a person in prison forever. You know, our judicial system is based on historical method and logic. It ain't science. The empiricists were wrong. You can't prove the universe and you can't prove God with empiricism. It won't work. You know, it may support it, but you can't prove anything by it. You can't prove history with it. Anyway. Okay, so back to Hebrews. In Hebrews, I think it's reasonable to assume that the authors of Hebrews have polished this logos incredibly. That's why it is such an important logos, because the logos they give us is the whole of the gospel in their thinking and the way that it fits within their culture, right? Not necessarily within our culture, but yet I think there's a lot to know from it, and that's the theological pool. It is God's word to us, and so therefore it has some value to us in the modern era. So with that, let's look at verse 16. I think I went through the Greek on this. Here's the NIV. In the case of a will, this is 9:16. In the case of a will, it's necessary to prove the death of the one who made it. That's not exactly what it says. Assigning a reason, whatever were a disposition to bear of constraint death of the two put apart to the diathemenos. And the diathemenos is literally through to place. I didn't put disposition around there because that's the translation, but I don't think it's right. Here's what I think literally this is saying. This is why I said I had to contemplate this for a while. Assigning a reason, any disposition that requires death to distinguish it. This is an incomplete thought. Our translators made it a complete thought, but it's not. Assigning a reason, any disposition that requires death to distinguish it, and therefore you have to go to 17. Okay, here's what 17 says in the NIV. Because a will is in force only when someone has died, it never takes effect while the one who made it is living. So here we go. 4, gar, it's gar. Assigning a reason, a diatheke. A testament is what the King James says. The NIV says a will, but remember I told you this isn't a will. A diatheke, a disposition, the is added, of force. And it's not a force. It's bibebos. Bibebos. Bibeos. Bibeos. You guys remember bibeos? We had parabibeos. Bibeos means a foot. And in this case, it means a foundation. It's a foundation. The foot is a foundation. In other words, you're standing on your feet. And most people who can stand will stand on their feet properly. Bibeos. It means stable. So stable. It's not force. It's stable. Stable when, it's epi, when men are dead. It's not men are dead. It's when a corpse. It's when a corpse. Otherwise, epi, thereupon, it's not otherwise, thereupon, it is added, it is added, of miapote, not ever, strength. Ishuo, I thought about giving you ishuo as a word. It's a primary verb meaning to have force. It's different than dunamos, but it's ishuo, to have force. Adol is added, while is hoto, at which thing to. Interesting prepositional word. Or, not preposition, he. It's like he. Pronoun. It's a type of pronoun. It's a question pronoun. At which it's ho, testator, and here we go. It's not testator. It's diathemie. Diatheminos. It's diathemina. It's diatheminos. To dispose. Something is disposed. So here's the word, here's the verbiage. Assigning a reason, a disposition, stable. When a corpse, thereupon not ever to have force, at which thing to, the two put apart lives. Liveth, zeo is at the end of that sentence. So diathemia and then zeo, liveth. Okay, so let's start with 16. Okay? Assigning a reason, any disposition that requires death to distinguish it, and then it continues. Assigning a reason, a disposition enforced by death, has a foundation when there is a dead body, but it is never enforced while the subject of the disposition is alive. Okay, this is my best guess at what the entire thing is saying. So the translation isn't too bad, right? But the force of this is really much more, I think, than the translation gives us, okay? The translation, in the case of a will, it's necessary to prove the death of the one who made it, and because a will is enforced only when someone has died, it never takes effect while the one who made it is living. But then our Greek says, assigning a reason, any disposition that requires death to distinguish it, and then assigning a reason, a disposition enforced by death, has a foundation where there is a dead body, but it is never enforced while the subject of the disposition is alive. Now this is really an important point, because what is the subject of the disposition? Who is the corpse? Christ, right? Christ is the corpse. And yet, what do they believe? What do they know? I don't like to use the word believe. What do they know?
Christ is risen.
Christ is risen. The implication here is that he was dead. And this may be a repeat, but remember, I told you, these people have taken out this argument and they've polished this argument. This argument, and in the Greek worldview, these logos teteloses aren't like this. They're like this. The logos teteloses are like this. They're going along in parallel structure. Many times, you'll have one that starts. We have in Hebrews especially, we see ones that start, and then they start another kind of train of thought, and then they catch back up, right? And we see this over and over again. So the writers are using, our problem of reading and looking at this is we tend to look at it in pieces, right? Someone quotes. Someone gives you a quote. 16. In the case of will, it's necessary to prove the death of the one who made it. What is that? It's a whole statement of whatever. And there are actually people who build whole theologies based on this statement. Can you do that? No, because this is all part of a larger, huge, logos, well, not huge. It's a logos tetelos. It's a polished logos tetelos. This guy, these people, the two authors, because I believe there are authors, maybe two, maybe more, who put this together, built it in, they don't use a beta form, so it may be more than two. But in any case, these arguments are meant to be a telos that theoretically, if you could read this in the Greek, you would come to an agreement. And, you might not agree. There's nothing wrong in a Greek argument with not agreeing with every point, right? What do they want you to do? There's only one thing they want you to do.
Get the telos.
Yeah, get the telos. Yeah. Now, it may be a telos. I think to think, right? That's the point. That's correct. To think or to logically come to a telos. But I don't think the Greeks were as concerned that you may have a telos that wasn't precisely exactly. It meant if you don't, that meant their argument was what? Well, I wouldn't use the word false. I'd say insufficient. Insufficient is probably a better way. There is a word in the Greek for a bad argument.
Compromised.
What's that?
I would say it was compromised.
Maybe, but you see, I think the Greeks understood this where we're not as happy with it. Okay? So, for example, in the jury example, I love the jury example because I have 12 people. All 12 of those people may be convinced or convinced of the guilt of the person. Was that?
Beyond a reasonable doubt.
Yeah, they're all convinced. But do you think they all came to the same conclusion the same way, in the same mode of thought? No. Some things appeal to some more than others. The emotional argument may have appealed to some. The argument of the dead body lying there, the argument of the scientific empirical, the logical reasoning of the prosecutor. Each person is a different person. I think the Greeks totally recognized that. But yet every person, as they took out the logos that was made to them, came to the same overall telos. But in coming to that agreement, do you think there were a lot of sub-teloses, or, right? That's why the Greeks show the telos as a vanishing point. Because how many vanishing points are there? There are infinite vanishing points, but how many horizons? One horizon. Do you get this? This is part of their way of thinking. That's why in the parabola, right, we have a singular telos, for example. Because, now, there's Jesus. Jesus, the Greek scholar, would tell you that if you missed the telos, you missed the whole point. But what did he say about his disciples over and over again in Mark especially?
They were always missing it.
They always missed it. Now, right? Now, see, that goes back to what you said, which I think is it's not unreasonable to see this. Okay, as a historian, I'd say, Jesus, you didn't know your audience, you didn't produce a good enough logos, right? As a Christian, from a theological standpoint, I'd say...
You picked the perfect audience because it represents us.
He picked the perfect audience because the point was for them to eventually get it, right? And he was talking cross-culturally to them, which goes back to Immanuel Kant, that only through God, only with a God, can you expect human beings to be able to all... The fact that a jury in a trial, the fact that a jury in a trial can all come to the same ultimate telos, right? From disparate evidence and a disparate logos, proves, in Immanuel Kant's mind, there is God. Yes, sir?
Well, in a trial, a murder trial, they're not necessarily saying the person is innocent if that's there. They're saying beyond a reasonable doubt. You have introduced enough doubt that I don't think he killed, but I don't know for sure. It's just reasonable doubt.
Right, because they may have committed. I mean, like, what's his name?
Did the
Probably
Greeks
killed.
think it that way? I mean, it's a...
Yes, because that's...
I'm not fully convinced, but it's a strong argument.
What's the
There hasn't
word?
been a better argument made.
Well, remember, the Greeks knew, and we're supposed to know from your geometry, you can't prove a true. You can't prove a true. You can only prove a false. Yes, sir?
That's why the telos is a vanishing point that never,
Rather
if it were truth, if you knew it was truth, it would stop on the horizon and it wouldn't be an infinite. There'd be a single point like that. But
As you move
because you
closer
can never
to-
tell exactly if it's true, you can never say it. They just keep going until they converge, but we don't know where it converges.
Exactly. And the Greeks, see, you're thinking like a Greek. Oh, there's Greek going on here. There's Greek thinking, ancient Greek thinking. You could be a Socrates, because that's what it's about. You know, I think the Greeks well understood this, but yet they were willing to, more so even than the Hebrews, because what did the Hebrews do? The Hebrews made their arguments, they would come out with a statement. And basically, they would argue the statement, but then once they had come to an agreement, it was set in stone. It became an intelos. It became an injunction, right? Because that's what the mission is all about. So therefore, you know, you're not supposed to travel on the Shabbat, but yet if I define the city by putting a cord around it, if I define the area that I can move in Shabbat as the area that I can put a cord around, and then I put a cord around the whole city of Jerusalem so I can move around in the city of Jerusalem, what did I do? I made an intelos that is obviously has no logic, right? The logic is faulty if you go back and look at it. And this is where Jesus was slapping him, right? Jesus was slapping him. He said, no, this isn't good Greek. I'm not sure what kind of thinking this is, was Jesus was saying, right?
Well, English thinking before time.
Yeah, well, yeah. Oh, okay, I will mention this. You know, that's the thing about laws. You know, the law says thou shalt not murder. It doesn't matter how you murder. It doesn't matter you murder with, you know, poison, or stab a person, or shoot a person, or trip them, or hit them with a hoe. It's murder, right? So why do we have to have all kinds of injunctions in our law that says, oh, if you murder someone with a toilet seat, you know, why is there a question? I mean, if I were a judge, you know, it's like the judge should be saying, are you an idiot? Kick you out of court. But yet we have injunctions that let people that murder, you know, go free. How can that be? Right? Anyway. Okay, let's go to 18. Because I'm sorry, we have some complexities here, but it gets a little bit better as we go along. 18, this is NIV. This is why even the first covenant was not put into effect without blood. Whereupon hotan, from which source ode, not however, the first, the protos, foremost, the testament is added, by the way, was ikezeo. It was renewed. It was renewed. Without, and it's not without, it's at a space. It's chores. Guys, remember chores? Chores. Chores is where the word chasm comes from. Chasm. Literally means at a space. So they translate it without, but it means at a space. So here's the literal. From which source not, however, the foremost was renewed in fresh, at a space from blood. Okay, here's what I think it's saying. For this reason, not even the first disposition was renewed separately from blood. So, this is why even the first covenant was not put into effect without blood. Is very different from, for this reason, not even the first disposition was renewed separately from blood. The author has told us, number one, how efficient was this renewal? No, it wasn't at all. Remember, he says, how can the blood of goats and of bulls do anything for your sin, right? But yet, it went on, and I told you, it's very complex terms. It was a question not of sin, but of cleanliness, right? And yet, the renewal of the disposition was done with the blood, right? So, what was the purpose of the sacrifice? This is what the author is telling us. To renew the covenant. Yeah. The purpose of the sacrifice was not for the forgiveness of sin, but was to renew the covenant. And we're going to get more into that, but and I'm sorry we're going to have to wait until like the next semester in the fall. But hope you can wait that long. We'll be all ready. We'll be all stayed up, ready to go. Thanks, Father, for your word. We pray you look after us, take care of us all. In your name we pray, amen.